Okay, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We have Jim and we have Kelly with us tonight, and we're going to talk about the Feast of Tabernacles. If you've never heard of it before, you've come to the right place because we'll explain it to you in detail. So sit back, enjoy the almost start to the Sabbath, and don't touch that mouse. Here we go. All right. Glad everyone could make it. It's been a long week for me. I don't know about the rest of you.
It has been long.
Busy, busy, busy. Boys have been busy for us. But we're here. Jet lag or not.
I'm glad you're
So why don't you take us out?
Okay. We'll give you a regular joke, and then we're going to step it up a level to a third grade joke.
Oh.
This one's called Missing Husband. Ray was in trouble. He forgot his wedding anniversary. His wife was really angry. She told him, tomorrow morning, I expect to find a gift in the driveway that goes from 0 to 190 in less than 6 seconds. And it better be there. Next morning, Ray got up early, left for work. When his wife woke up, she looked out the window, and sure enough, there was a box in the middle of the driveway, gift wrap. Confused, wife put on a robe, ran out to the curb. She brought in the box in the driveway back in the house. She opened it and found a brand new bathroom scale.
I take it he didn't come home early that day.
Ray has been missing ever since.
Yes.
Actually, it went from 0 to 200.
No.
Now, here's a third grade humor. Now, this one you have to picture the words in your mind because third graders are just learning to write. So picture these words in your mind. Why did Susan's coffee taste like mud? M-U-D. Answer, it was fresh ground.
Oh my.
I would agree with Susie. I don't like that.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, I told you it was third grade, didn't I?
Yeah.
Up a level, right?
So, the title of the show is Why Should You Go to the Feast? So, James, why don't you let us know why we should go to the feast?
Okay. I just to put it in straightforward terms, when you look at the Bible as a whole, the greatest spiritual revivals in the Bible's history are the Feast of Tabernacles and sometimes the Passover Days of Unleavened Bread, which is also a season too. Those are the times when Israel had their greatest spiritual revivals. And it seems like in some ways the Feast of Tabernacles was the greater of the two, though both are important. And I want to talk about, well, just the history of why the Feast of Tabernacles was such an engine for spiritual revival, and that's why it's important to us, even in today's mundane, non-Bible living world, which is also season two. Those are the times when we start making great spiritual revival. Okay, is my soundtrack slowing you? Is it going too slow?
No, we're fine.
Okay. So I was going to look at when David collected all the gold and silver and conquered all the nations around him, so they had peace. And because he was a man of war, God didn't let him build the temple. His son did, and that was a great revival. And you could say maybe in a in many respects, that was the height of Israel's greatness. Was early in Solomon's kingdom, right, shortly after the passing of David, when the temple was built, and they dedicated the temple, and God Himself appeared in the temple in Jerusalem as a way of revitalizing Israel, and kind of, well, that was a high point. Israel was never that great or that powerful or that wealthy, I believe, in the history of Israel, period, after that point. So let's go to 1 Kings 8. We can kind of look at it, that the Feast of Tabernacles has been a kind of like a key around which spiritual revivals have gone for spiritual Israel as well as physical Israel. And we'll get to the church history in just a minute. And that's why people should go to the feast. You want a spiritual revival, as much as you can get in this unspiritual, materialistic age, go to the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, we're at 1 Kings 8, verse 2. And all the men of Israel assembled themselves unto King Solomon at the feast in the month of Ethanim, which is the 7th month. That means the Feast of Tabernacles, for those who aren't familiar with all the dates. It's in that 7th month. That's when they assemble to dedicate the temple. The whole rest of the chapter talks about it. Then you can maybe pick up verse 65 and 66 of that story, 65 and 66. And in that time Solomon held a feast, and all Israel with him, a great congregation, from the entering in of Hanath unto the river of Egypt, which would be the Nile, before the Lord our God, 7 days and 7 days, even the 14th days. On the 8th day he sent the people away. They actually kind of had a double feast. And they blessed the king and went to their tents joyful and glad for all the goodness that the Eternal had done for David his servant and for Israel his people. Actually there's a prayer that Solomon gives in verse 54, thanking God for answering the prayer and the promises he gave to David. And really at that point, in spite of what happened to Solomon in his old age, at that point he was very spiritual, and Israel was at its greatest height. And they actually waited after they finished the temple to the Feast of Tabernacles to dedicate it. They just didn't dedicate it in any. They waited till it was to God. Let's see. Other comments about the feast.
Well, I know the feast for me, I mean, it was pretty, when we first feast we went to, just real quick, it was just, you see the love and the kindness from the people, and tell you what, when you've been in the world all your life and you come into the feast, it is kind of a culture shock of decency, and it's sometimes, it's kind of hard to swallow all at once, especially if you've never been to one. But after you've been there, you can see the purpose of it, and you can see the value of going. Being surrounded by like-minded people, and by, like I said, the love and the kindness that share, it's overwhelming. I mean, it'll just make you sit down and cry to think that all these people actually care, and they've never seen you in your life.
Yeah. That's the thing about the feast is it's so different than what most people have ever experienced, and anything that that they've grown up with, any of the other holidays. One thing is, at least for me, maybe I'm just odd, but like you go on vacation.
Oh, you are.
Go out, and usually I have to go back to work to rest because you're worn out from the vacation. But with the feast, when the feast is over with, there's so much energy that you draw from the being with God's people and the fellowship that you don't have that feeling of being worn out when you get back from the feast. You have a lot of energy. You're raring to go, And so, to me, that just shows the difference between, just going out and having a vacation and what one of God's holy days means for his people and what it does for us.
Right.
It's just a wonderful thing to experience.
And
Well,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
go ahead.
No, the purpose of the feast is to show us what it's going to be like in God's kingdom.
Mm.
And you can really see it. You can see a kind of an earthly, what's the word I'm looking for? A physical.
The ambiance.
Yeah, it's as close as you're going to get on Earth to understanding what being in the kingdom's going to be like. Surrounded by like-minded people, that's the first thing. A feeling of safety and security, and it does well represent what he's trying to get across from us. And I'm sure there's some other scriptures and things that you'll go into that kind of explain that more, but it's like, because some people, I think they think we're on vacation or what have you. It's a vacation on steroids. It is so much more than a vacation. It is actual rest, actual release of the last months of stress from you, and it's totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, Leviticus 23, it mentions that it's done at harvest time, and it's the big harvest, the fall harvest. Usually it's early October, but with our calendar, it moves around a little bit from the Hebrew calendar, but usually October, the big harvest, so you have a lot of fruit. Those the people had maximum food so they could really have a good time. Really kind of the bounty of the harvest is kind of like, and of course that's when God will save all people. And my example was, I'd been reading the Plain Truth books, and Rotzi, anyway, but I was back east. When I went to the Army, I knew that from reading the Plain Truth, they had a college in Big Sandy, and the Army took me to Texas, to Fort Sam Houston. I thought, well, some weekend day, I'll just drive. I didn't realize how big Texas was. It was a long drive, but I drove to Big Sandy, and when I got there, I went in there, and they were having services. It was the Day of Atonement. I thought, wow, that's kind of meaningful. So I went back the next day to the base to talk to the colonel. I need to get 8 days off. I forgot what I said. And he said, yes. He said, Lieutenant Riggs, go do it. And I attended my first feast, and it was wonderful. Most people were intense at the time, little cabin buildings, but it was friendly, and it was there was a really great atmosphere there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, once you've been to the feast, in any person's life, there's a few things you remember. You remember your day you're married. You remember your children being born. You remember there's certain things in your life like that maybe half a dozen things you remember. And once you've been to the feast, you remember your first feast.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it stands out. Even if it wasn't the greatest, you didn't have the most fun and do the most stuff, doesn't matter. You remember your first feast because it's special. It's the first time you were introduced to a major part of God's law and His plan, and it's special.
And I was thinking, that whole thing about when Solomon was able to, and God actually went to the temple of God and appeared there in the Holy of Holies. When God made the temple holy, like when Christ said, what's more valuable, the gold or the holiness of God that makes the gold special in the temple anyway. When he went there, and you'll also see it described in 2 Chronicles 7:7-14. I'll just read verse 14. He just said, if Israel had any crisis, any problems, and they needed a spiritual revival, they need spiritual rescue, spiritual help, and I'll read 7:14, 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven. I'll forgive their sins and will heal their land. And you could even, now of course the Jews prayed toward Israel where the temple used to be, but I would say the principle is still there, though. That happened originally at the Feast of Tabernacles, but is not really what the country needs? Spiritual revival.
Yeah. Yep. It sure does.
Yeah. I mean, it's because just the way the feast is. It's I don't know. Sometimes I have a hard time explaining because I can't associate with anything else that I've ever experienced in the world. But I mean, it's such a different atmosphere and the spiritual energy that you gather. That I mean, if the world kept the Feast of Tabernacles and that was the only thing they did, I think that right there would completely improve the whole world just in doing that. Because there's just so much spiritual power there that re-energizes people and gets people focused on God and your life and your Christian life and lifestyle. That I think that would just change the whole face of the world if people just kept the Feast of Tabernacles. I think the other stuff would come in after that, but if they just did that, I think it would make such a tremendous difference in their life.
Yep. What it is, it's a call. It's a for some reason it's not switching. It's throwing me off. But anyway, it is it is a family reunion of God's called out people. No, we're not all perfect, so we're not saying that. But what we are saying is they're people called out of a like mind, chosen for a specific reason. We get together, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And when you're there, it is. I guess you would describe it as a revival. I mean, it's the way I've always looked at it is your batteries kind of run down as you get closer to the feast, and then you get to the feast, you get that charge, you take that out, and it takes you through the next year. So it revives, our energy.
Yep.
For lack of a better way to put it, but so I mean, it's all about revitalization and revival.
All right. What other scriptures did you have?
Yeah. You know, I more and maybe to it. First Kings 12:31 and 33. Most people aren't familiar with that one, but let me give you the background to it. The northern 10 tribes were, well, actually, because of Solomon's son was an idiot, and because of Solomon's sins at the end of his life, God said, he was going to set Jeroboam over the northern 10 tribes. So God did it. It was God's will. But Jeroboam got insecure. And he thought, well, people start going back to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles and whatever, and the other things, especially the Feast of Tabernacles, every year. One day they're going to say, why don't we be one kingdom and get rid of him as king? I mean, that's normal human political thinking. But since God gave him the northern 10 tribes, he should have trusted God to stay with it. But he talked to his advisors, and I'll just read 12:31 to 33. We can just discuss it, but it makes a point about the Feast of Tabernacles. That's what they're referring to primarily here. And he made in the house of high places, little hilltops you could put pagan groves and temples and poles and stuff on, and made priests of the lowest of the people, not the Levites who were trained in Bible law and Bible knowledge, but the lowest of the people who would do anything for a buck. They used to have a term, shade tree preacher. Or am I thinking of something else? Anyway, never mind. Lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi. And Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month, 15th day. Instead of the 7th month, in the middle of the 7th month, he moved it back 1 month and a day. Like unto the feast that is in Judah, or Jerusalem, and he offered upon the altar. So did he at Bethel, sacrificed in the calves, and he placed in Bethel the priest of the high places which he had made. In effect, he made 2 convenient locations one toward the southern half, one toward the northern half. He said, hey, it's too much trouble. Go away to Jerusalem. We got you 2 different locations you can go to, and we give you a different date. So he offered upon the altar which he had made in Bethel in the 15th day of the 8th month, even the month which he had devised in his own heart. In other words, it wasn't God's religion, didn't match with God's sacred calendar, his holy days, his annual Sabbaths, his own heart, and ordained a feast unto the children of Israel. And he also took the role of high priest himself, offered upon the altar and burnt incense. Well, we all know what happened to the 10 northern tribes, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yes.
And the interesting thing is, when you compare them to Judah, you look at the succession of kings. They have little things in some Bible helps. The kingdoms were generally much shorter. There were often murders, coups, murders, coups, murders, coup, murder, coup. And they never got a good king. It was bad, bad, worse, bad, bad, worse than ever. It was down, down, down. Where Judah, because they were keeping the Feast of Tabernacles and some other things, they stayed with the truth. Depends on how you want to look at it, 15 centuries. The northern 10 only lasted a little while, and they were gone in captivity. They lost the true religion when they abandoned the Feast of Tabernacles.
Yeah, I read that and I find it. To me, it's amazing that they were keeping essentially the same festival, the Feast of Tabernacles, but they were doing it incorrectly, and that made all the difference in the world. I mean, just like we've just got through describing all the benefits of the Feast of Tabernacles, but yet it's not just the fact that keeping it. You're keeping it when God commanded it to be kept. And without that command, it's just a vacation, and you don't get the same benefits as you do because it's a God can't command holiday. It's like a lot of the world's holidays that Satan has tried to deceive and put in place of God's holy days. That you realize that when you keep God's holy days, there's great benefit from it, and
Right.
You don't get the benefit even though you're doing some of the same activities on other days. It's not the same thing as keeping God's law.
Nope, you're right.
And I think that's an example of it that they went awry and off into history.
Are you getting my audio?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I can hear you fine.
All right, because it's Google's, so you can't see it on my end, but and that's why it's not switching to me. I think Google's not recognizing it. But what I wanted to say about that was, they like you said, they replace God's holy days with the world replaces it with other things. So it's funny to sit back once you've been doing Christmas, and then switching. You're done with Christmas. You switch to God's holy days, and you look at the feast. And you trade 30, 40 days of running around like a chicken with your head cut off, buying presents for people that don't care nothing about you, and you're not too off fond of them, but you'll be looking bad if you don't take care of, do that. And you spend tons of money you don't have. The world goes into debt for months or maybe longer after that fact. And then it's all over in 24 hours, right? So in 24 hours, it's all said and done, and you're exhausted, you're broke, and you're in debt for months, if not longer, and that was supposed to be a great, wonderful thing.
Right.
And how long do the toys last?
Yeah, 50, 60 seconds maybe, or,
Is it 3 weeks at maximum?
Oh,
Yeah,
I had more,
3 weeks at max?
Right.
Depending on where they're made at.
Right, and then, or the box gets more used than the toys half the time.
Yeah, it's better than the toy.
But
that's what's amazing. You take the world's attitude, like you just described, and then you look at God's plan and what it is. I mean, what are we instructed to do? We're instructed to save up during the year and then go to the feast and have a great time. You don't go to the feast and go in debt. You save up through the year, and then you go to the feast and you have a great time and spend that money there and enjoy yourself. It's completely opposite of the world's holiday of, God go out, spend what you don't have, and buy worldly things and give it to everybody else, and nobody likes it, and they have to go back and stand in lines to return it, and and then the depression and suicide rates during the holiday seasons, and
it's the worst.
Different.
Yeah, the suicide rate is highest during the Christmas season than any other time in the year.
Yeah.
And if you want to do that, if you want to spend your money on people during the feast and help them out, or you just want to buy, you can still do all that stuff. If you want to do that, you think you're going to lose something, you can do that. But you don't have to.
Yeah, but it's you're helping people versus just buying material things that'll be thrown out in 3 weeks or 2 days or whatever. It's just a completely different attitude that's there.
Let me ask you, several young people have said, well, they never like the gifts they get from their grandparents, their parents, so they tell them, just give me a gift certificate.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about that. How do you feel, Kelly, and Gary, about gift certificates as opposed to gifts?
Gift certificates are easy. I used to hate them, but I've gotten to the point now where that's the easy thing to do. Just grab a gift certificate because it's so hard to figure out what people want, like on birthdays and things, and so it becomes easy. So I would say it's a lazy gift. You don't have to put any thought into it. You don't have to think about the person you're getting it for. You don't have to know their likes and dislikes. You just go take care of yourself. And it's not like you used to. People put a lot of thought into gifts and things. I mean, some people still do, of course, but more and more it's just, hey, I can run and get it's funny that you can go to Lowe's and they got probably one of the biggest gift card selections anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lumber yard. But they got all kinds of gift cards.
Do you know why? Besides the fact that you're spending the money, they get your money up front. You know, one of the other reasons they love gift cards?
What's that?
It's somewhere between 2 to 5% of them never get spent. It's free money for them.
Oh, well.
It's kind of off topic, but it's just doing what I do. I knew that stat, but
and how shallow Christmas is spiritually compared to it. Like, for instance, if you look at Nehemiah 8:14, you can read the whole chapter, but as Nehemiah he and Ezra were getting the Jewish people, they got the Bible, and they were getting the Bible back and getting those that returned from exile back into God's spiritual renewal. They did it at the Feast of Tabernacles, and you'll see it. Nehemiah 8:14, they talk about how they read the law of the Feast of Tabernacles, and it goes on to talk about it. But again, God's using the feast as a time for the spiritual renewal and confession and repentance of the exiles returning back to Jerusalem. And then I was thinking about the history. We talked about how when you change to worldly holy days, it's like spiritual poison. I was thinking about the opposite of that is history of the Worldwide Church of God. As best I understand it, not that Herbert Armstrong was the first to ever do it. He read a book by some minister, and I had a copy of the book a long time ago, about 1902, who talked about some branches of the Church of God were keeping the holy day. And Herbert Armstrong joined the branch, the Oregon Conference, and I believe it was 1927. And he read the book, and maybe other things too. He decided that the holy day should be kept. And when he started keeping the feast, that's when the church in the modern era really started to grow.
Yeah. I think it's significant. It ties together, just like you've shown in Scripture, that the renewals and the revivals, that are based around the Feast of Tabernacles. Because, like I said, it's hard to explain to somebody who's never been. There's just such energy that's pulled from meeting and fellowshipping with God's people during that time that it does it. You can be down in the dumps or letting the world get to you, but when you get there and you start enjoying the fellowship, you're brought up, and when you leave, you're ready to face anything that's out in the world.
Yeah, in fact, you forget. You pretty much forget what's going on out in the world. I mean, you go to sites like we have a site in Montgomery. Gary knows. You go there, you're cut off from the world. You might just get like some you get some very low-speed internet out there. Maybe your cell phone will work. Probably won't, though. But so you're kind of cut off from civilization for 8 days. That's kind of a good thing.
Pretty isolated.
Yes, you are. Except for the smell of the horses in the barns, you're pretty isolated.
You're out there in the cornfields, right?
Oh yeah, it's what you're surrounded by.
We thought of plugging for Branson. That new place, Westgate Branson, the Woods. It's interesting. When you're right in the northern edge of Branson city limits, and there's a little private security gate. You go on the security gate, then it's outside the city limits. You climb up this hill into the wooded area, just outside city limits. But while you're there, it's like you just left all the Branson traffic and whatever you want to call it, and there you're in a secluded set of condos and motel rooms, and so like it's almost like you're in a very wooded area, but you can drive down the hill through the gate, and within 3/4 of a mile are some of the best restaurants and some great entertainment, like Sight and Sound Theater had a fabulous thing of Joseph in his many-colored coat. It's a Broadway musical play, but they did it in such a fabulous style. Huge theater, huge stage. I actually understand Joseph more from seeing the play than anything in the. I mean, it was really good. Anyway, I'm plugging for Branson as a feast site, where you're close to the what I call family entertainment, but you're still secluded, and you could, depending on what arrangements you make, you could stay there and never go down the hill. Well, most people want to for good restaurants and some nice entertainment, but you could stay there the whole time if you wanted to, and eat in your condo and all that other stuff. But anyway, I just threw that in there. I'm promotion. What can you say?
I know exactly what you're talking about. Because Myrtle Beach is the same way. You can go to the Landmark Hotel, and you can stay there, and you don't have to go anywhere. Everything you possibly could want is right there in the hotel, and you can just stay and fellowship and sit around. People just sit around and talk the whole time. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. And, of course, we have other feast sites, too, that aren't represented here. But that's another great thing about the feast. There are so many different feast sites that you can actually get to go and travel and meet people in God's church and fellowship with them. And, you know, if you show up at a feast site, I'll guarantee you will feel like you're just meeting with family. You know, people will just accept you and bring you in, and it's no matter where you go, they're all great places.
And one thing to keep in mind is I remember the history of the Worldwide Church. They had one at Belknap Springs up there in the Oregon area, and then they got this land donated by the Hammer family, which is now, was Big Sandy, Texas area. They had huge feasts, and they would say those people would attend at the feast were the strongest church members, and the church really grew. You know, the feast was like a magic bullet, helped the church really grow and grow and grow during those 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, when the church had an unbelievable compound interest growth rate. Now, I realize things have changed since then. We're in more of a quiet period of the church's history, but I still think the feast is important.
Yes, it is.
Well, the Feast of Tabernacles is a training period. It's like going off to school for 8 days, and at the end of the 8th day, you graduate. You're actually training yourself and your family, whoever's with you, for the time and the duties and the responsibilities that you're going to have in the millennium.
Right. Why don't one of you gentlemen tell the listeners what the feast represents, the 7 days of the feast, and what the last day represents. If someone would like to do that, that'd be great.
I'll jump to the last day if you want.
Go right ahead.
Because a lot of people don't think too much about that final day, the 8th day. It's not really a day of the feast. It's a holy day unto itself. It's the last great day, and what that symbolizes is the final judgment. And I'm always fascinated with the last great day and what it represents, because it answers a question that a lot of people in mainstream Christianity or people who are not religious at all ask. and they ask what's going to become. One fellow in particular told me that he doesn't believe in the Bible, doesn't believe in God, because God isn't fair. He said there's millions and millions of people who live and walk and died on this earth that never heard the name Jesus Christ or God. They don't know anything about it. He said it's not fair that God's not going to bring them into the picture. But yet, the last great day really symbolizes exactly that. When everybody that has ever been born and lived and walked the earth and died, then they will finally get their chance to understand the truth. It'll be presented to them, and they'll have a chance to understand it. So that is the final judgment, and it's that opportunity, and that's why it always fascinates me. One more question I've got I want to throw out here to you guys. Is any of you ever stayed over past the last great day and came home the day after the last great day?
Yes.
If you have, like me, you get up in the morning and the feast and the last great day is all over with, the whole spirit is completely different. You wake up back in the world that day, even though you're still in that same location. I've noticed that almost every feast I go to. I don't like to travel on the last great day. To me, it's just a thing that I don't care to do. So we
No,
usually,
you're right. You're absolutely right, and I get the same.
Yeah.
I get the same feeling when we stay in the next day and the holy days are gone. You know, and it's just you know it. You instinctively can feel that something has changed.
yes, something is gone.
Yeah. I remember the first time that I did that because we were there and a lot of people left on the last great day. And so the way things worked out, I had some extra vacation. We were getting tired of trying to get loaded up and all. So I said, let's just stay over a day and we can leisurely get ready and we don't have to worry about trying to get everything packed the night before the last great day. And I remember waking up and getting up and walking out on the balcony and walking out and looking out on the complex we were staying at. And it felt so lonely.
Yes,
Yep, that's it. That's the feeling.
that's the word I was looking for.
And it's the kind of thought kind of running through my mind. If I was left out of God's kingdom,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And I thought, I am so glad that I just had these past days. And then I started focusing on that and all the energy that I had, the fellowship that I had, and was ready to go back in the world. But just being there without God's people, it's just a completely different feeling. It's not the same place, and it's hard to explain to people. And a lot of people probably think I'm crazy, but if you haven't kept the feast, you just don't know what you're missing.
Yep. So what is the feast itself? The 7 days of the feast. What does it represent?
Well, it represents the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, and also the harvest season. They're kind of all linked in together, all the holy days. The first, Pentecost is the first smaller harvest. That's the Church of God period we're in now, of Pentecost. But then Christ comes back, Feast of Trumpets, the last trumpet blown. Then he's at one with the world, and then we'll have that 1,000-year reign of Christ. A lot of people will be converted, and the world will know prosperity unlike anything they've ever seen. I mean, physical prosperity, food. By the way, most Americans don't know. All those people crawling in on the border, south of Texas, coming across the border, at least in part, they're doing it because of poverty and near starvation. Most people in the world have to spend, 50, 60, 70% of their income to eat. I mean, relatively, Americans have more food and it's cheaper. Like one man said, he said, I want to go to America, where the poor people are plump. I mean, we are blessed and we don't even know it.
Yeah.
That's right.
So the only point I'm getting at is the Feast of Tabernacles, everyone will be living in a physical, it'll just be a great blessing, physically speaking, as well as a spiritual blessing. Because one thing you get at the feast, you get spiritual food and you get physical food.
Yep. And there are people there are groups that keep the Sabbath, but I don't. And there's some that don't keep all of God's holy days, and they're really missing out by not keeping all of it.
Mm-hmm.
There they are. Well, one thing I want to get in is that I had a friend one time who was looking into the feast, and I remember he was discussing it and talking about it, and said that his wife, in their discussion about whether to keep Christmas or not, made the comment that, well, I don't want our children to miss out on all the wonderful memories that I have of Christmas, and I don't want them to miss that. And it kind of threw me for a little while at the time to come back with an answer. And I was talking to another friend that was in the church, and he said, and every time that I think about it, that's why I like to spread it out there so people know that. He said, but you have the same memories during the feast. He said, you create memories during an event, not just because it's that time of year, but in the event. And he said, you have great memories. You have them for 8 days of being with God's people, and you think about those memories and your children and being with other children in the church, and that they realize that, you know, the things that they're being told that's different from everybody else, that there's actually other people out there that actually believe the same things. And it, you know, builds them up and gives them confidence that they're not alone out there. You know, but when you're back in our local groups and stuff, sometimes you feel like you might be the only person in your whole area that believes what you believe. And to be a child and going to school, and that when you get to go to the feast and be with everybody else, you see you're not alone. And you create these great memories that people who have grown up in the church and have always kept the feast look back on their memories, those wonderful times. So you're not missing anything by giving up these pagan holidays.
Yeah,
Because,
instead of 24 hours, you got 8 days.
right, and you're replacing them with God's holy days, which are greater and much more beneficial, just like we've been talking about, the revival and things, and they're great memories that families can build together. You can get families there.
That's because Christmas and the so-called seasonal holidays are the counterfeit, where we have the real thing.
Exactly.
We're the real thing. And if they could only understand it, I'm sure that they do look back with some fond memories. There's no doubt that Satan dresses it up very nicely, especially for the children. He knows how to get his hooks into the children. But my very first Feast of Tabernacles, when I went home after that, I knew in my heart that I would never miss another one as long as I was physically able to get up and get there. I never had that feeling about Christmas. By the way, if you look at Christmas and the extension of the holy days to January 1st, and counting Christmas Eve, because so many people start their celebration on that day, it works out to 8 days. It's a counterfeit of the Feast of Tabernacles.
And by the way, I may be the only one that felt this way, but I believe to a lesser degree other people do too. I found myself having high expectations for Christmas, but being let down almost every one. So I have bad memories of Christmas. How come I didn't get the toys that so-and-so across the street got? Now, I know you're going to say you were just a selfish little kid. I was, and they couldn't afford to give me the stuff I deserved. I'm saying from my point of view.
Well,
So I hated it most of the time. And they'd give me gifts like underwear and socks. Are you kidding me?
Oh, I got those, but I still got G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip and the Jeep and the Star Wars Land Cruiser. I made out pretty good.
Well, Gary said something a minute ago that I find interesting because, you know, with a feast, we look forward to it. We hate to see it end. But with the other holidays, I remember, and I hear people now talking about they will be so glad when Christmas is over. And they're keeping it because of the stress and the strain that they're under. They actually, you know, can't wait for it to be over. Whereas God's holy days, you got people, you know, hoping it's never over.
Right.
So
If you're watching this, or it's some, you know, not live or some future date, and you celebrate Christmas and you have those same feelings of I'll be glad when it's over, or why do I do this, you know, and you get depressed, or why are you doing it? It's not in the Bible. Stop. You don't have to. And if they call you Grinch, too bad.
I'm always glad when it's over, and I don't even take part in it.
Yeah, get all those stupid commercials out of the way, and but as I say, I bet you there are a lot of disillusioned kids. Both the toys didn't live up to expectations, and other people got better stuff. It couldn't have been just me. I know there have been a lot of disillusioned kids. I might have been just at the top of that bad list.
Well, a couple
No,
other things. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I'm sure everybody at some point in time, if they ever kept Christmas, experiences that disappointment of, building up your hopes. I've got my own story that I won't go into, but you're looking so forward to it, and then bam, it's not there, and it's just, you're so disappointed.
Oh, didn't your mom get you the BB gun? The what is that? The Rider, whatever. What was that BB gun?
Radio
Red Rider. Did you Red Rider? I don't know.
No, it wasn't a TV game.
Okay. A couple other things, because we are 45, and we could spend hours talking about the feast, but didn't Christ himself keep the feast in, was it Zechariah?
John 7.
Or John?
I'm looking at the scripture now. If you go to John 7 and you go to verse 10, Christ went up. They had caravans of people from his part of the country that everybody went to Jerusalem for the feast. He went up secretly, not with his caravan, because the secret police of the temple, scribes and Pharisees, wanted to arrest him and kill him. So he had to go up secretly. With his life at stake, he went to the feast. And then on verse 37, and I'll just read verse 37, John 7. And in the last day, that great day of the feast, that's what Gary was talking about, the last day of the feast, Jesus stood up and cried, saying, probably one of those porticos around the temple with thousands of people there, if any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. And then you read the rest of the sermon. Later, the Pharisees tell the captain of the guard, the temple police, well, why didn't you arrest him? He was up on stage. Thousands of people were watching him. Why didn't you arrest him? And they said, we've never heard a man give a sermon like that. He left the audience spellbound right there at that Feast of Tabernacles. Anyway, I would have loved to have heard that last sermon that Christ gave at the feast.
Yep. One other thing, and I don't know why I said Zechariah, but it's been a long week. But in Zechariah is where we're told that one of the first things every nation is going to have to do is keep the Feast of Tabernacles. I mean, if it's not important, why does it say straight up in the Bible, you're going to go, you have no choice?
Including the Pope.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, God's got to make countries go to the feast. The details really aren't relevant. How's he going to do it, and this and that, through drought and other power? But God's going to force countries to go to the Feast of Tabernacles. And by the way, once the world does that, the world will be unified. The Feast of Tabernacles will unify the whole world in love. But right now, they couldn't even get a ceasefire to last for more than 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Early this morning, and because of the hatred that this world is drenched in.
Yep. Well, does anyone have anything else they want to add about the feast?
Just if you haven't ever experienced it, I highly recommend you give it a try.
Yeah, what's the worst that could happen?
You have some fun.
You'll enjoy yourself.
I've always said you have to try not to have a good time at the feast.
Yes, that is true.
Let me put in one more point here. I remember one of the first feasts in Montgomery. There was a fellow there, and I really can't even remember his name now. He was from up in Minnesota with that group up there. And he did a sermonette, and he made the point that you will get out of the feast tenfold what you put into it. In other words, he was calling for everyone to participate in the feast as much as they possibly could, because that's the way you gain from the feast.
That's a good point. That's a good point. That's an excellent point. And it does, anybody can have a role to some extent. Mm-hmm. Just see Kelly, and he'll give you one. or James, and I'm sure he'll have something to assign to you.
Well, Kelly's giving away rolls. I'll take an apple cinnamon.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to do bingo?
All right, that's good. So now people get the idea of why they should keep it. It's commanded. It's not an option. and you should, if you're going to follow God's law, you should do that. So,
It's like
all
going
right.
to Cairns.
Go to the church website, the EA website, and get all those phone numbers and make reservations.
Yep, there you go. So let's. We're going to sign off. So good night, everyone.
Good night.
Remember, everyone, to seek the kingdom first and enjoy your Sabbath. Good evening.
Good evening.